But we begin tonight on the day before the third anniversary of the January 6th insurrection. And late today, the U.S. Supreme Court agreed to answer what might be the fundamental question for our democracy: whether a president who attempted a coup to try to remain in office and failed can then come back and run for president again. And since January 6, 2021 was our first coup in America, it is something this court has never grappled with, namely the meaning of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which was written after the Civil War specifically to keep the Confederate insurrectionists and any future insurrectionists out of office. The difference today, of course, is that the insurrectionist in question was not a slaveholding senator or a congressman from a seceding state. It's a former president. But I guess there is a first time for everything. Oral arguments are set for February 8th, which is also the date for Nevada's Republican caucus. It is the first of what could be many pivotal decisions that could come from this court, not only impacting the 2024 presidential election, but our very democracy itself. While Colorado, along with Maine, are the only states who have ruled to kick Trump off the state's ballots, there are dozens of other states facing efforts to do the same and likely awaiting the Supreme Court's decision. And while one of Trump's lawyers, Alina Habba, confirmed earlier this week that Trump is concerned that the conservative justices could rule against him over worries of being perceived as political, yesterday she appeared to say the quiet part out loud, that certain justices may rule in Trump's favor because they feel they owe her client for their jobs.
I think it should be a slam dunk in the Supreme Court. I have faith in them. You know, people like Kavanaugh, who the president fought for, who the president went through hell to get into place. He'll step up. Those people will step up, not because they're pro-Trump, but because they're pro-law, because they're pro-fairness. And the law on this is very clear.
Joining me now is Congressman Adam Schiff of California, former member of the January 6th Select Committee. He's currently a candidate for the United States Senate. And Congressman Schiff, it's good to see you. You know, I wish that Alina Habba sounded mad to me, but I don't think she sounds like a mad woman. I think what she's saying might have some legs, not just Samuel Alito, who's gotten everything he's wanted from Donald Trump, meaning his ability to get rid of Roe v. Wade and confine women to the stirrups, but Clarence Thomas, whose wife materially participated in the insurrection. Here's what House Democrats wrote to Justice Thomas, asking him to recuse. This time, we must urge you to recuse yourself from any involvement in the case of Anderson versus Griswold, because your impartiality is reasonably questioned by substantial numbers of fair-minded members of the public who believe you, your wife, Virginia Ginny Thomas, has substantial involvement in the events leading up to the January 6th insurrection and the financial incentive it presents for your household if President Trump is reelected are disqualifying. Do you question whether this court might feel it owes Donald Trump and the conservatives might rule in his favor for that reason?
Well, I have to say, if you're skeptical about this court, there's good reason to be skeptical. They've shown they're not a conservative court. They're not a court that feels bound by precedent. They're a reactionary court. They're a partisan court. And here, one of the justices in particular, the one you mentioned, Justice Thomas, has a very personal, close family member, a spouse, who had a role in trying to overturn the election. There is unquestionably a conflict here and an appearance of impropriety should he sit on that case. But I have to say, I expect that's what he'll do, because he doesn't seem particularly concerned about avoiding conflicts of interest, the appearance of conflicts of interest. Neither does Alito. And so there is, I think, room for concern and skepticism. The Constitution here is very clear. If you've held office and you took an oath to uphold the Constitution, and then you essentially incited an insurrection against the Constitution, you're disqualified. That's not just the view of liberal constitutional scholars, but conservatives like Michael Luttig. If the court follows the Constitution as it claims to owe its fealty to, it shouldn't be that difficult a decision. But I have to say, I don't have a lot of confidence in this court.
I think I share your lack of confidence. But let's just say, by some miracle, 5 of these justices decided to rule that he should not be on the ballot. What do you think the political consequences of that would be?
Well, I think it would be a good thing for the country. I think that the debate in the election could get back to a difference of policy rather than this kind of cult of personality around the former president. I think we have to be concerned with the former president trying to egg on violence in the event of a court ruling like that. Obviously, on January 6th, he was willing to do it. He'd be willing to do it again. But I think we're a better, stronger country than that. And I think the country will accept the decision if the decision is to remove him from the ballot. I think the country will accept the decision, whatever the court ends up doing. But I think we need to prepare ourselves certainly for a president who is not averse to using violence to achieve his political ends.
You have not only been a member of Congress and the January 6th committee member, but you've been an impeachment manager. You have gone through this former president's, sort of ill acts in many ways. What do you think would be the consequences for our country if this court rules that somebody who egged on an insurrection that was an insurrection for him to remain in office remains on the ballot? If they rule that he can stage a coup and then run again, what do you think the consequences of that will be?
The consequence, I think, will be at least twofold. First, it will mean that the 14th Amendment, Section 3, no longer has any meaning. If it doesn't apply to someone who led a mob to attack the Capitol in an effort to overturn and interfere with the joint session, overturn the results, it has no applicability anymore. So it will be the Supreme Court essentially nullifying a part of the Constitution. The other impact, though, will be to throw this court just into further discredit. It will come to be seen by even more Americans as simply now another partisan institution, another institution that essentially has fallen in line behind a corrupt president. And I think it will damage the court's reputation further. But even more broadly, at the end of the day, it will mean that someone who should be disqualified will be likely the Republican nominee, the nominee of one of America's great political parties. And it will move us potentially even closer to catastrophe, because should Donald Trump ultimately be successful, and I think Joe Biden beats him in that election, but I do think we would be something less than a democracy should we have to go through another Trump presidency. We have to take him at his word when he says he wants to be a dictator on day one. And I could have little confidence in what would happen on day 2, 3, or 4, or any subsequent days of any kind of Trump second term.
I think more than a few people will likely agree with you. Congressman Adam Schiff, thank you for your time. Much appreciated.